Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be the PoetryTube Newbie Tag. The PoetryTube Newbie Tag was created by Adrian from Stripcover Lit, and he also tagged me. I will link to his original video. Question number 1 is, do you read and write poetry, or do you just read it? I occasionally accidentally write poetry, and I say that because when I used to blog more regularly, and I mean years ago when I was in school and we used to occasionally have free writing prompts where you could be writing something that was an essay or a short story or any format you wanted. I would sometimes write what I thought was an essay and people would come up afterwards and say, oh, I really liked your poem. So I was clearly accidentally writing poetry, and same thing with some of the blogging, so I think that's kind of funny. Question number 2 is, who is your favorite poet? Being a war poetry buff, of course my favorite poet of all time is Wilfred Owen, but if I had to pick a favorite living poet, I would say Kai Cheng Thom, whose the title poem, A Place Called No Homeland, really impressed me when I read that a little over a year ago, and it continues to impress me. So, yeah. Question number 4 is your favorite poem, and that varies, but I'm going to go with Wilfred Owen's Strange Meeting, which is the one that starts, "It's seen that out of battle I escaped down some profound dull tunnel long since scooped through granites which titanic wars had groined, and there encumbered sleepers moaned," etc. Last year on Remembrance Day, which was also the centennial of the armistice for the First World War, I dragged my mother along to see the Toronto Symphony Orchestra and the Toronto Mendelssohn Choir were doing Benjamin Britten's War Requiem, and we went to watch that, and I asked my mother, what did you think of it afterwards? And her comment was that she liked the music, which is the Requiem part, but she thought the poetry was rather gory, and the poetry was a bunch of Wilfred Owen's poems, including Strange Meetings, so yeah, rather gory was her vote. Question number 5 is, what is your favorite poem to read aloud? I think my favorite poems to read aloud are probably children's poems that you get to recite at a child, and especially the ridiculous ones like Dennis Lee's poems. Tyrannosaurus Rex, tiny in the brains but enormous in the necks, taller than the CN Tower, longer than Quebec. Don't fool around with Tyrannosaurus Rex. How can you beat that? Although if I had to pick a serious answer, I'd probably say Rilke's Leda, because every time I think about swans, I think, you know, the first couple of lines of that poem. Den Schwan so schön zu finden, and all that. Question number 6 is, who is on your Mount Rushmore of poetry? Which implies that I stole a religiously important mountain from someone and carved my leaders into it? That's bizarre. Why would I have a Mount Rushmore of poetry? I don't know. If I were going to sculpt poets, it would just be a bunch of the First World War poets. So Wilfred Owen, as I said, Siegfried Sassoon, Isaac Rosenberg, Rupert Brooke, just for fun, because his poetry is so much less cynical than everyone else's. Question number 8, rhyming. Talk about it. Yes, no, not anymore. Well, I think the great fun of rhyming poetry is how much fun it is to say out loud and to shout at people, as with the Tyrannosaurus Rex poem. I think a lot of kind of free verse type poetry doesn't need to rhyme, but I think it lacks the kind of innate rhythm, so you have to hear someone recite it. You can't just get it immediately. And a lot of that depends, because I think there are a lot of languages where words are much more likely to end in a vowel or that include vowel harmony, where rhyming works differently than it works in English. So it depends. Question 9 is, barring free verse, what is your favorite poetic form? And I feel like I said this in the 52 questions tag, but I don't have a favorite form because I think any individual poet's skill and talent and combination of skill and talent in any form is more important than the form itself. But I hate the way we use haikus in like Anglophone culture. From what I've read, there tends to be more skill allowed to the creation of haikus in Japanese situations, but in Anglophone situations it's just, oh, it's easy, write a haiku. And I hate that. So anything that's not a haiku is my answer. Question 10 is, humor in poetry or ellipses? No. My answer is yes, because did you not hear me give you the Tyrannosaurus Rex poem? Yeah. Come on, of course humor. Question number 11 is, what elements do you think contribute to the best poetry? I think it depends, because I think it depends what you're looking for in poetry. I think there's a tendency to want poetry to be complicated and ridiculous, and it doesn't need to be, and I think there's a snobbery about poetry that's not very skilled but that taps into emotion, and I think, who cares? And I think if that works for someone, I think critiquing it for being too simple is kind of ridiculous. Because I think the idea that poetry is something that has to be difficult is something that should go away, because why should it be difficult? Why shouldn't it be easy? I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. And I think when you go to a poetry reading, I think a lot of the author's ability to kind of throw their poems at you and have them connect with you is one of the best skills a poet can have. So I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna move this over so you can see this maybe. Alright, that worked, right? We'll see if I have to edit that out. Alright, that was the last question. The next question is to tag some people. And I think a lot of people who are drawn to poetry and talk about poetry on BookTube have already been tagged. So what I like to say is, if you're a secret poetry fan or writer, I'd love for you to do this tag. Consider yourself tagged, and let me know if you've done this video, and link to it below so I can watch it. Alright, that's it for now. Ciao.